Hello guys, welcome back to our virtual class. So today we are going to discuss about the account. But first, we have our new tool, whiteboard. Yes, proving na tayo guys. So, ang itatopic natin ngayon ay ang tinatawag natin na account. So first, what is an account? Account is an accounting form of record in which the effect of similar or alike business transactions are grouped or classified. This is an accounting device to record the increases and decreases of specific asset, liability, owner's equity, revenue, or expenses. Just like in other professions, um, where they use specific tools or specialized tools in doing their um, work. Here in accounting, we also use a specific tool in which we call the account. Account is an accounting device or tool we use especially if we want to know the changes in certain accounts. Here in accounting, the most common account tool that we use is what we call the T account. It composed of three parts: the account title, the debit side or DR, and the credit side or CR. Usually for beginners, they use the account to know the changes again of a certain transaction, especially if they're not used or familiar much in accounting. The debit side, the normal balance of a certain account in debit side is asset, expenses, while on the credit side, the normal balances of a certain account in which we can see in the credit side is liabilities and owner's equity. So credit side is on the right side, where we can also see the date in chronological order, while debit side is the left side. Also in date, and in chronological order. Chronological order means we record transaction based on the flow of the events depending on the time in which it happens. So we record first those transactions that took place earlier. Then the last is the later transaction is the last that we record in the T account. So first, what are those account titles? So we have asset, liabilities, and owner's equity. We will give certain example for those accounts or elements of accounting. And let's have first the different effects of transactions in which we record in the T account depending on the kind of elements. So for asset, we record its increase and expense increase in the debit side. Liabilities, we record its increase on the credit side and increase of owner's equity on the credit side. Debit is the value received, while credit is the value parted with. What we have shown here as the decrease of asset and expenses and the decrease of liabilities in owner's equities is what is their normal balances. And of course, in the credit side, it is the opposite of asset and expenses, while on the debit side is the opposite of liabilities in owner's equity, or we have also income as an increase. Yan. So asset is credited when decreases, liabilities is debited when decreases, expenses is credited when decreases, while owner's equity and income is debited when decreases. So, yan yung summary ng mga transaction, effects ng transaction in accounting. So, you must remember those effect of transaction because it is critical in accounting practices. And here in the bottom side is what we call the balances. And the net, total balance, total credit balance, total debit balance, and the net would, and the the most bottom part is the net. Remember to use the double rule, means it is the net effect. If the debit, if the amount in the debit side is more than the credit side, then it's a debit net debit balance. Well, if the amount in credit side is more than the debit side, then it's a net credit balance. Let's now proceed to the journals and the ledgers. So we have journals as the book of original entry, while for the ledgers is the book of final entry. So we'll just present an example of a general journal. What we can see in a general journal is simply this. Or what some other businesses use is the journal voucher. First, of course, we need the date, the account that we use. Or if we have accounting code, we use the accounting code. The reference number or posting reference, if it is on debit side or credit side. So, yan yung general journal natin. Example of general journal, and at the bottom part is where we indicate the particulars or the transaction that happened. For example, we record a sales. To record sales on account of 500 pesos on 9/28/2020. Paano natin ma-record yan? Date muna. Ano yung account? So, yung transaction na nangyari ay sales. So, could be sales. This is an account pala. A debit side muna yung i-record natin. So, on account means hindi pa natin nare-receive yung pera, marireceive pa lang natin. So, yung i-record muna natin is accounts receivable. So, sales. Saka natin i-record yung sales or revenue ng 500,000. So, may monetary value na siya. It's measurable. It would also identify the transaction that there is a sales. Then, that's the time that we record or we journalize the amount. So, leave muna natin ito kasi wala pa tayo na specify na code. But if certain company uses accounting code, then we use the code that is specifically assigned for accounts receivable, Then specifically code that is specifically assigned for sales account. For example, we have GJ number 1. Number 1. Debit side 500k, credit side 500k. So that is the general journal or journals. Next is the ledgers or the book of final entry. So there are two kinds of ledger. We have the general ledger and the subsidiary ledger. So in the general ledger is the grouping of all accounts used in preparing the financial statements. It is generally called a controlling account. Because it reports in a summarized form the activities that have taken place as recorded in each subsidiary ledger. Well, subsidiary ledger is a group of like accounts that contains the independent data of a specific general ledger account. Independent data of a specific general ledger account. In our example previously, what we use is the sales and the accounts receivable. So whatever the changes in accounts receivable, okay. So GJ1, GJ2, GJ3, GJ4, GJ5, GJ6, GJ7, whatever the net amount of that will be shown in the general ledger. Okay? So what is the basic format of general ledger? So general ledger, this is the basic format of general ledger, in which we summarizes or combine the transaction of involving a similar accounts. In our example, we use the accounts receivable, so this is the general ledger of accounts receivables. And what we can see is the date, the item, the reference number, the posting reference, the transaction that happened, whether debit or credit, and of course the balance, debit or credit. For example, we have a beginning balance in AR of 10K. In our previous example in the general journal, we have a sales on account of 500K that happened on September 28, di ba? Sana natandaan niyo yun. September 28. So we record first the date. So the item will be sales on account. So the item is the particulars or the transaction that took place or the transaction. Then, what is the reference number? So it's GJ number 1, right? If you've written it, then our transaction is sales and accounts. So there's an increase in accounts receivable kasi may makokolekta pa tayong pera na 500,000. Nagkaroon lang tayo ng sales pero inutang muna ni customer natin kaya meron tayong makokolekta. So, yung account na ginagamit natin sa pagkolekta is accounts receivable. And ang normal balance ng accounts receivable is debit. So, pag normal balance, nag-increase siya, kaya ilalagay natin siya sa debit side ng 500,000 pesos. With that, we can get our running balance of 510,000 pesos. Of course, it's on debit side because it is an increase in the asset. Well, on subsidiary ledger, okay, we'll just briefly discuss it. So we have accounts receivable, and we don't know from whom we transacted these transactions. So normally, in the companies, they maintain a record of their customers for their reference purposes when the time that they need to collect. So that is where they're going to look at it, to look at the transaction. And it's where they maintain the subsidiary ledger. So for example, ang sales na to is kay ABC company. So, kunwari, may sales siya na beginning dati ng, so, kunwari, yung 10K na to, 10K na to is kay ABC. So, nagkaroon ulit ng sale sa kanya na may makokolekta sa kanya. So, dadagdag yun sa subsidiary ledger niya ng 500K na transaction. So, yun yung subsidiary ledger, no? An independent data of specific GL accounts. So, pwede din yan sa mga payables, mga suppliers mo na may utang ka. So, pwede ka rin mag-maintain yan ng mga records mo or list mo ng mga suppliers mo. And that is where the use of subsidiary ledger comes in. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which is the chart of accounts. Chart of accounts. Chart of accounts is a list of account titles with assigned account numbers used as a guide to facilitate recording of business transactions. The list of account titles are grouped and classified according to the accounting elements like the assets, liabilities, owner's equity, revenue, and expenses. So, depending on the companies, sila din yung nagsiset ng mga account number nila and account titles. But there are several common account titles that most companies use, no? So, for asset. And ina-arrange nila yan based sa mga, for example, in assets, the most liquid one. So, we have the cash, accounts receivable, notes receivable, prepaid expenses, PPE or property, plant, and equipment. Then we have for liabilities, yung mga solvent naman, no? Yung mga mababayaran currently. Then, so we have accounts payable, AP, notes payable, interest payable, or trade payable, loans payable, no? Bonds payable, and any other payable. While for owners, no. So, kunwari, ito yung debit side, ito yung credit side. So, ano pa nga yung nasa debit side natin? We have expenses. Expense elements. Usual na ginagamit, salaries expense. Utilities expense. Office supplies expense.
What else?
Taxes expense. Insurance expense.
And so on and so forth. Well, for the credit side, ano nga yung nakikita natin?
Owner's equity.
So we have
Capital and withdrawals.
for some other companies, they no longer use withdrawals or drawing.
Drawing pala.
Magkaiba kasi yung withdrawal sa drawing.
Drawing.
For some other company, they no longer use the drawing capital. So whatever drawings they do, they directly account it from or against the capital account. So kung drawings yun, so bawas yun sa capital niya. Binabawas na nila kaagad yung capital.
And another one for credit side is
We have, of course,
revenue. Sa revenue, usual na nakikita natin is sales income, sales revenue, service income,
ano pa?
rent income, interest income,
And any other income. Yan yun, nililist lang natin, no, sa chart of accounts, yung mga accounts na ginagamit natin sa company natin. And itong mga sinabi natin dito, yan yung mga usual or common accounts na ginagamit natin.
so nag-a-assign lang tayo ng mga account number natin.
Depende sa size or laki ng business natin. Ang pag-a-assign natin ng number, so pwede itong 6-digit number kung masyadong marami ang transaction mo, marami kang asset na ginagamit, or pwedeng 8-digit number. Pero pwede rin namang at least 3-digit number. So in our book of Valencia, the example there is only a 3-digit number.
For example, 110, accounts 120, 130, 140. So, nagbibigay tayo dito ng allowance ng
At least 10 number para kunwari kung may isisingit ka pa na accounts in between sa cash and accounts receivable,
so maire-record mo pa siya dito.
na side. So kunwari isingit natin si trade receivable. So pwede natin siyang i-record na 115 kunwari yung
Account number niya, no? Ito pala yung account.
So, yan yung purpose bakit merong gap dito in between sa mga basic accounts na nakalagay dito para meron tayong allowance for new accounts.
At hindi,
Kasi nga, di ba, yung listing natin ng accounts is sometimes based sa liquidity, sa most current na account. So, since si trade is liquid yan, current yan, dito natin siya ipapasok sa bandang taas ni cash and the accounts receivable, hindi sa baba ni property, plant, and equipment. The same goes for liabilities, no? Meron din niya mga certain allowances.
for example, 210, 220. So, sa trade payable, pwede natin ipasok kay 210. At 220, so pwede 215 siya.
No?
Sa cash, pwede pa tayo magpasok ng mga cash in bank, BPI, kung isa-isay natin, cash in bank, BDO, yun. So, pwede 111 to 112.
Ito. So, yun. Yun yung purpose ng may allowancing sa chart of accounts natin. Before tayo mag-move on sa pag-discuss ng mga examples of different accounts for asset liabilities, owner's equity, revenue, and expenses, let's tackle first. So, di ba nakita nyo na shortcut na lang yung mga ginagamit ko. I assume na alam niyo na kung ano ang mga ito. A for asset, L for liabilities, owner's equity for OE. Expenses or revenue. So before we proceed in giving examples for each of these elements, no, let's tackle first the real accounts, what we call the real accounts, and the nominal. Real accounts and nominal accounts. So ano ba yung real accounts? Real accounts are accounts that comprise the elements of the balance sheet: asset, liabilities, and owner's equity. They are not closed or not put to zero at the end of the accounting period. So they are also called permanent accounts. Kasi tuloy-tuloy lang yung pag-record mo ng accounts niya. Periodically lang, pero nag-accumulate yung balance ni asset, liabilities, and owner's equity hanggang meron kang business. Kaya siya tinawag na real accounts or permanent accounts. While for nominal accounts, these are accounts that comprise the elements of the income statement, which is the revenue and the expenses accounts. So they are nominal accounts. These accounts are called temporary accounts because they are. So nominal accounts or temporary accounts because they are closed or put to zero balance at the end of the accounting period. Kung si real accounts not put to zero, si nominal accounts, we put it to zero. Meaning, yung mga na-accumulate niya for a certain period of time, like for 1 year, nililipat natin yan kay real accounts, no? Zero balance natin, zero out natin yung income statement, whatever was earned or produced in the income statement, it will be zero out or close to real accounts. Hindi siya tulad ni real accounts na tuloy-tuloy lang siya, ano? So that is the two different kinds of or classification of our accounts. Okay, now, so let's proceed to the different examples of account titles or different types of accounting elements. So in the asset and liabilities, we divide them into two: current and non-current. So usually in the current, it is a 1 year, within 1 year transaction, while for non-current, more than 1 year transaction. So the most common example for current is debit balance asset, no? So recap, tandaan lang natin. Okay, sorry for that. Sorry for the intervention. Sorry for the background sound. The most common type or examples of current asset is, so we have cash. very liquid. Cash equivalents. So cash equivalents are short-term, highly liquid investments that are readily convertible to known amounts of cash in which are subject to an insignificant risk of changes in value. So ito yung mga bills na within 3 months lang yung maturity niya. After 3 months, mako-convert mo na siya sa cash, mga treasury bills. The next is notes receivable, inventory, and we have also supplies. Mga madalian lang nating na ginagamit. Prepaid. Prepaid expenses. Mga office supplies or insurances or advertisement expense na binali natin na in advance na which is usually good for 1 year. So, yun ay mga prepaid expenses. In advance nating binili kahit hindi pa natin siya gagamitin. Pero, usually these are used within. So, yung period niya or yung okay. So, yung period niya na magagamit mo siya or na-estimate mo siya na magagamit is at least within 1 year. Kaya nilalagay natin siya or kina-classify natin siya sa current assets. Well, the most common example for non-current asset is or are property, plant, and equipment or PPE. Mga mga malalaking equipment like office equipment, furnitures and fixtures, land of course, building. So mga pangmatagalang gamitan yan, no? Mga service vehicle, delivery equipment and store equipment. So yung equipment, binili natin siya ng 500 and inasset natin siya, hindi natin siya dinirect expense. But it doesn't mean na hindi siya nababawasan ng value. As a rule, yung mga equipment, pag ginamit natin yan, is nababawasan ng value. Pero hindi lang natin alam kung magkano yung specific value na nabawas sa kanya. Kaya in accounting, there is what we call depreciation tools, depreciation of assets. No? So that is the tool that we used in calculating the value that has been used up in the or from using the assets. So sa 500, nagsiset lang tayo. So in depreciation of assets, nagsiset tayo ng estimated useful life. Ilang years mo siya gagamitin. Salvage value. Kahit na alam natin na ginagamit natin or nababawasan na siya ng value, meron pa rin natitirang value, at least maliit na value na kung saan pag naubos na yung useful life is maibebenta mo pa siya sa amount na yun. So, yan yung tinatawag natin na salvage value. Ano? And then, of course, the cost, meron na tayo. So, yan yung mga kailangan natin sa pag-compute ng depreciation ng asset, ng property, plant, and equipment. So, in this case, for example, bumili tayo ng office equipment valued at 500,000. So, feeling mo magagamit mo yung office equipment for at least 10 years. Mag-assign tayo ng estimated useful life ng 10 years. And then, at the end of the 10 years, feeling mo meron pa siyang value na 5K. Or pwede ka rin mag-set ng percentage ng salvage value. Like, for example, 5% ng original cost. And the cost is this. So now that we have those amounts, we can now compute for the annual depreciation. in which our formula is cost of the PPE minus salvage value if any. So, pwede rin namang wala yung feeling na inubos mo lahat ng value ng PPE. Pwede naman yun. Pero pwede rin namang may salvage value, di ba? Meron nga yung meron namang bumibili ng mga ganyang ka-use up na ng mga property, di ba? Na ibebenta mo pa naman siya kahit sa pinakamurang halaga. Kaya at that at least at that part meron tayong salvage value. Then over the economic useful life. So in our example, meron tayong cost na 500k minus salvage value na 5k all over 10 years. So yung value dyan, yan yung annual depreciation natin or annual value na nagagamit natin pag every yan yung value na nagagamit natin every year. So 500 minus 5 divided by 10. So 49,500 pesos. Kada lumipas ang taon, yan yung nagagamit natin kay office equipment. Kahit pa sabihin natin na hindi naman natin siya laging na-open, so meron at meron pa ring value na nababawas doon. At hindi naman natin may specify kung i-open man natin o lagi nating na-open ang amount na nagamit natin doon. Kaya yung ginagamit na lang natin is itong depreciation tool. Depreciation of asset. So, yung depreciation or yung value na nagamit natin, nire-record natin yan sa depreciation expense. So, from the term expense, it is a debit account. Parang normal. Addition mo lang siya sa expense mo. Well, yung katapat niyan, di ba, lagi merong dual aspect concept or duality, no? Meron lagi yung katapat. So, ang katapat niyan ay accumulated depreciation, which is a contra asset account. It's a deduction from certain account. So, ini-specify lang natin kung anong asset account yung merong accumulated depreciation. In this case, yung example natin is office equipment. Accumulated depreciation / office equipment. Pwede ding accumulated depreciation / furnitures and fixtures. No? Yun. So, that is the concept of depreciation. Since si accumulated depreciation is a contra asset account, so we may categorize them in the asset category. And it is a real account. Aside from those asset na na-mention natin, kinukonsider rin natin na asset yung mga intangibles. So, ano ba yung mga intangibles? These are identifiable non-monetary assets without physical a substance held for use in the production or supply of goods or services, for rental to others, or for administrative purposes. These are goodwill, patents, copyrights, licenses, franchises, trademarks, brand names. So, yung mga copyright na yan, licenses is nire-record din natin as an asset, especially kung ikaw yung nanguna, di ba? Pinangunahan mo ang pag-discover ng certain equipment na yan or discovery. So, yung pag-register mo ng patent na yun is ina-asset natin or nire-record din natin yan as non-current asset. So, yung mga expenses na na-incur mo sa pag-register doon, yun yung amount na ina-allocate natin sa mga accounts na iyon like copyrights, licenses. Since 'di ba mga non-physical substance naman sila. Kaya yung mga related expense na nagamit natin, yun na rin yung ina-assign natin sa kanila. Now let's proceed to the next element of accounts, which is the liability. Just like asset, liabilities composes of two: current liab and non-current liab. More than so, yung mga makokolekta mo na within 1 year, yun yung mga current liabilities natin. While yung makokolekta mo beyond 1 year, yun yung mga non-current liabilities natin. So, normal balance ni liabilities again is credit balance. So, you should familiarize yourself now on those normal balances of different elements, accounting elements. The most common types of current liabilities are accounts payable or trade payable, accounts payable, notes payable, accrued liabilities. So, ano lang yan? Simple lang yan yung mga in-incur natin pero in-incur natin, kinuha na natin yung service or nagamit na natin yung goods pero hindi pa natin nabayaran. Yun ang mga accrued liabilities which we assume that will be payable within 1 year. So, for example, salaries payable, utilities payable, interest payable, and taxes payable. As long as na mabayaran natin yan within 1 year, current liabilities yun. And we also have what we call unearned revenue. Payable siya in a sense na binayaran ka na pero wala ka pang nabibigay na serbisyo kaya unearned. Hindi mo pa siya na-earn kasi wala kang nabigay na serbisyo. Nagbayad lang si customer. So may liability ka or may future obligation ka na magbigay ng service or goods kay customer. Kaya tinatawag siya na unearned revenue. So that is a liability. That is not a revenue, okay? Huwag kayong malit dyan. Then we also have the current portion of long-term debt. So, pwede yan sa mga loans, no? So, yung mga 5 years. So, yung mga payable mo for within 1 year, yun yung current liabilities natin. While yung naiwan na payable mo from 2 to 5 years, yun yung non-current liabilities natin. Diba? Simple lang. Then next, for the examples of non-current liabilities, so we have mortgage payable. Kailangan mo ng pera, pero wala ka namang mabigay na guarantee na makakabayad ka. So, minortgage mo na lang yung property mo. So, binigay mo muna yung property mo sa pinag-utangan mo. So, ang babayaran mo doon is pag nabayaran mo na yung utang mo, tsaka mo makukuha yung asset mo. So, that is a mortgage payable. Then we also have bonds payable. So, ito naman yung mga bonds payables ay mga for example, mga bonds na ini-issue ng government. So, usually 3 to 5 years yung terms niyan. So, non-current liabilities yan sa part ni na government. Terms, yun. So, meron din yung mga interest charges. And
non-current portion of debt. So, na-discuss ko na yan kanina. Then, next element of account is the owner's equity account. So, singit ko na lang siguro. Konti lang naman siya. Konti lang naman yun sa owner's equity account. Capital lang, drawings, then capital, drawings, then yung net income or loss na nakuha natin sa income statement, di ba? Inuuna natin gawa yung income statement. Kinukuha muna natin yung mga revenue and expense, ninenet natin. So, pag mas malaki yung revenue, it's a net income. Pag mas malaki yung gastos mo, it's a net loss. Tsaka natin siya pinapasok kay owner's equity. So, yun yung laman ni owner's equity. Let's now move on to the income statement elements or revenue and expenses. So we'll just give the common examples of revenue accounts and expenses accounts. So let's go first for revenue. Anything with income associated, so that would be revenue. So common natin, di ba? Service and sales. So we have sales income and service income. So, kung gusto mo pa yung expand, pwede din naman i-detail mo ng rent income, ano pa, interest income, and any other income na magkakaroon tayo ng benefit. Then, for expense, so ano nga pala yung normal balance ni revenue? It's credit balance. For expenses, normal balance is debit balance. For expenses, the most common type is, of course, the salaries expense, the utilities expense, so cost of sale. So, kung may sales tayo, meron tayong cost of sale. Yung mga cost na nagamit natin sa paggawa ng product na yun. Okay. So, sa cost, nagdadagdag lang tayo ng markup. Then, yun na yung selling price natin. Then, we have rent expense, insurance, depreciation expense, na-discuss na natin kanina. Meron din tayong tinatawag na bad debt expense. Bad debt expense or doubtful accounts expense. Yung mga expense na hindi na yan yung mga expense sa receivable natin na hindi na natin na-kolekta. So, binabad debts na natin yan, masamang utang or doubtful account expense. Instead na ma-receive pa sana natin, failing natin, hindi na siya makakabayad, tinakbuhan na tayo, binabad debt expense na natin instead na magiging cash pa siya, no? So, parang siya, parang loss mo kasi salip na may makulik ka, wala ka nakulik. So, loss yun. Naggastos ka lang ng paggawa ng produkto, pagbigay ng service mo, pero wala ka naman nakulik. So, that is a very bad debt expense. Pero in the case, merong case naman na nakukulik mo siya ulit. Or nare-recover pa pala natin yung mga bad debt or doubtful account, doubtful na receivables natin. So, di ba, nag-bad debt expense na natin, nire-reverse lang natin yung ni-write off natin na bad debt expense. So, ibinabalik lang natin yung receivable.
So, yun yung bad debt expense. So, ano siya? Expense siya kahit kasi nga 'di ba bad debt expense. Hindi siya asset, expense na siya. So that's it, guys. You just need to familiarize yourself with these accounts for you to be able to properly record accounting transactions. Kasi, um, especially kung ano siya, kung real accounts or nominal accounts. Kasi magkakaiba sila ng nature. 'Di ba sa real accounts, hindi natin kino-close while um, for nominal accounts, kino-close natin siya. So, iiba-iba yung yung amount ng net income natin. So, not properly uh, or not fairly presented yung financial statements na binibigay natin sa client. Kaya, be sure na alam niyo kung ano yung mga account titles na ginagamit, especially yung unearned. Huwag kayong malilito. Unearned revenues, that is liabilities, accumulated depreciation, contra asset account yun. Bad debt expense, that is an expense. Meron din pala tayong contra asset account kay receivable. So, ang tawag doon is allowance for bad debt expense. Yun naman, nagbibigay pa lang tayo ng allowance. Yung kung may hint ka na, may konting hint ka na hindi mo siya, kunwari, nag-lapse na yung 1 year. So, or nag 3 years na, hindi mo pa rin collect. So, magbibigay ka na doon ng allowance. So, hindi mo pa siya ini-expense. May konting hope ka pa rin na makukulik mo yon, pero nagbibigay ka lang ng allowance just in case na hindi mo talaga siya ma-collect. So, if ever na hindi mo nga talaga siya na-collect, doon ka palang mag-i-expense. So, yun naman ay budget expense talaga yun from its nature, 'di ba? So, that's it, guys. Just familiarize yourself with these different accounts. So, ano ba yung mga alien dito or kakaiba na mga accounts? We also have the bank drafts. So, I think that is an asset, while bank overdraft is a liability. Cash overdraft, no? Liability siya kasi nag-issue ka ng check, pero yung laman lang pala ng bangko mo or account mo sa bangko is maliit. Nag-issue ka ng 50, pero ang laman ng bank account mo is 30 lang. Pero despite that, inaccept pa rin ni receiving bank yung cheque na yon. Pero payable mo naman yon. So, may liability ka kay bangko kasi pinagbigyan ka lang niya na ibawas pa rin or ibawas siya sa account mo kahit kulang yung pera mo. Pero magiging liability mo yon. Parang pinautang ka lang ng pamadalian. Dapat mo pa rin yung bayaran, like for example, within 3 months. Dapat mabayaran mo yung mga bank overdrafts na yon. Okay? So that's all for this module, and that ends our module 2, guys. I hope you learned something from it, okay? And be sure to familiarize yourself with those accounts that I've mentioned about. That's all for today. Thank you. Hope you have a good day.